Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into higher education, specifically Australia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we found this opinion piece in Times Higher Education called Academics Must Retake Control of Australian Universities.
Okay.
It was published pretty recently,
Okay.
January 21st, so just last week.
Last week,
It
wow.
was by Hamish Coates and Leo Godegebuur.
Uh-huh.
I think they're pretty well known in the field.
Yeah, they are big names.
And they make this argument that Australian universities have become way too focused on, well, profits.
Really?
Yeah, and that they're relying like way too much on international student fees.
That's interesting because they actually call Australia's approach weird compared to, most other countries. Yeah, most countries don't depend so heavily on international students for their funding.
Right. It does make you wonder what happens if those international students just stop coming,
Exactly.
or if the government changes their policies about international students.
Yeah, you're basically building a system on, something pretty shaky.
Seems risky, and that's just one of the challenges that they point out.
Yeah.
They also talk about this rise of what they call the administrative class in universities.
Okay.
And they argue that these administrators, they often focus more on the bottom line, like the money, than they do on academic values.
I see. So we've got this unusual funding model
Right.
and this powerful administrative class. What kind of impact are these things having on Australian universities? What do they say?
Well, Coates and Godegebuur argue that it's led to a decline in how the public sees universities.
Oh, all right.
People are starting to see them as businesses.
More as businesses than places of learning.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If universities are always focused on attracting international students and making money, it's easy to see how they might lose sight of their main goals.
Yeah.
Like teaching and research.
Right.
Imagine you're a student and you feel like you're just a source of income for the school.
Yeah, that would definitely affect your experience, I think.
For sure. And the authors say that this overemphasis on finances has also led to universities not really having a long-term vision.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they're so busy reacting to problems right now
Right.
that they're not thinking strategically about the future.
So, if a university is only focused on enrollment numbers for the next, few months,
Right.
they might not invest in research that could take years to really, show results.
Exactly. Even if that research could be groundbreaking.
Yeah, for sure.
So they're saying that Australian universities are too focused on the short term,
Uh-huh.
and they see this this weird path they're on with the funding and the administrative class as the main reason for this problem.
Yeah. Basically, they're arguing that Australian universities are getting distracted from their real purpose.
Right.
Which is, helping students think critically, creating new knowledge. Yeah.
And preparing students to be good citizens.
It's interesting, though, because they don't just complain about it.
Oh.
They offer a solution, a pretty bold one, actually.
Okay, what is it?
They say that academics need to retake control of Australian universities.
Wow. So they're saying that academics need to step up and lead the way.
Yeah, they're the experts in teaching and research.
Right.
They should be the ones in charge.
That is a fascinating idea. So what would that look like in practice? How do they actually, how do they envision academics doing this?
They suggest setting up national platforms.
Right.
Where academics can get together and discuss things like teaching practices, setting standards for the whole sector, even giving career advice to students.
So a space where academics from all over Australia can collaborate and, shape the future of their profession.
Exactly. And they actually point out that Australia used to have these kinds of platforms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that a lot of other countries still do.
So it's not a crazy new idea.
Yeah, it's more like going back to something that worked before.
Exactly.
And adapting it for today's world.
And what I find really compelling is that they say this shift would help everyone, not just academics.
Oh, how so?
They believe it would make universities more stable
Okay.
and more sustainable,
Uh-huh.
and it would create a better balance between, academic values and the need to make money.
So imagine a system where academics have a real voice in how universities are run.
Right.
And where the focus isn't always on making a profit.
Right. It's about making sure that teaching and research are the top priorities.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to their criticism of short-term thinking.
Uh-huh.
They're really adamant that this constant focus on immediate problems is actually making things worse.
Like they're just putting out fires all the time.
Yeah, exactly. You're so busy reacting to the latest crisis that you can't think strategically about the future.
Right.
Imagine a university president who's only worried about enrollment numbers or the latest bad press.
Yeah.
Can they really make good long-term decisions about things like research or what courses to offer?
Probably not. It's like they're always in crisis mode.
Exactly. And the authors connect this short-term thinking directly to the decline in public trust that we were talking about before.
Right. If universities seem unstable or like they're constantly changing their priorities,
Yeah.
it's hard for people to trust them.
And it's interesting because they go even further and say that this reactive approach is hurting universities financially too.
Really? I wouldn't have thought of that.
Oh.
How so?
Well, they argue that by always chasing these short-term gains, universities are missing out on long-term investments. Like instead of building strong relationships with their local communities
Right.
or investing in research that could have real benefits down the road,
Yeah.
they're more focused on attracting international students and getting quick research grants.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. The focus on short-term gains leads to instability, which then makes it even harder to think about the long term.
Yeah, I see. So how do they propose breaking out of this cycle?
They say it comes down to academic leadership. They argue that academics are natural, long-term thinkers.
That's true. I mean, they're used to working on projects that take years, sometimes even decades.
Exactly. They're not motivated by profits or what's popular in the media. They're focused on the big picture, asking the fundamental questions.
Right.
And pursuing knowledge just for the sake of it.
Yeah, they're not afraid to challenge the way things are.
Right. And they're willing to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Yeah. That's the kind of thinking that we need more of in higher education.
Absolutely. But let's be realistic. How would this shift to academic leadership actually work?
Yeah.
What would it look like on a daily basis?
Well, they don't give us a step-by-step plan,
Right.
but they do give us some hints.
Okay.
They talk about academics setting standards for their own profession,
Okay.
guiding how courses are designed, and having a say in how research money is spent.
So instead of administrators making all the decisions from the top down,
Yeah.
you'd have academics shaping things from the ground up.
Exactly. And this connects back to their point about the administrative class.
Right. It's not about getting rid of administrators.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that they're experts in management and finance, not necessarily in the finer points of teaching and research.
Right. It's about finding the right balance.
Exactly. Administrators should be supporting academics, not telling them what to do.
It's a partnership, not a competition.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway for everyone involved in higher education, whether you're a student, faculty member, or administrator.
Yeah.
We need to work together
Definitely.
and use each other's strengths and make sure that the main purpose of the university is always at the center of our decision-making.
That's a great point. It reminds me, actually, they talk about this idea of globalized higher education.
Right.
And they argue that, with universities all over the world competing with each other, it's even more important for Australian universities to have their own identity and to focus on their core mission.
It seems like they're worried that this global competition is pushing universities to be too similar.
Yeah. Like a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Where everyone is chasing the same rankings, offering the same programs,
Exactly.
and basically becoming interchangeable.
Yeah. And they believe that this actually hurts the quality of higher education.
Yeah, like we're losing the unique strengths of different cultures and intellectual traditions.
Exactly. So where does their idea of academic leadership fit into this global picture?
They believe that by empowering academics,
Yeah.
Australian universities can stand out in the global higher education landscape.
Okay.
They can focus on what makes them unique, their specific research strengths, and offering programs that meet the needs of their local communities.
So it's not about retreating from the global stage.
Right.
It's about engaging with it on their own terms.
Exactly. Being confident in their own values and priorities.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's about being a leader, not a follower.
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful message for any university anywhere in the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've talked about this idea of academic re-leadership. And it seems like it could be a way to address some of the big challenges facing Australian higher education.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that this is just one perspective.
That's true.
What are some other viewpoints on these issues?
Right.
Are there people who disagree with this call for academic re-leadership?
Yeah.
And what are some potential problems or downsides that we should be aware of?
Good
We'll
questions.
explore those in part 2.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Australian higher education. Before we really get into the how of academics retaking control, as the authors put it, I'm curious, what really stood out to you in this first part?
Honestly, it's that idea that academics are the ones who need to fix things. It's easy to just blame the government or administrators. But Coates and Godegeber are saying the change has to come from within the academic community.
Yeah, they're definitely not saying academics should just sit back and complain.
Yeah.
They need to get involved and actually shape the future of their profession. And one way they suggest doing that is by setting up these platforms in the national higher education architecture.
When I hear that, I kind of picture like a national council or a committee of academics.
Yeah.
But not just for abstract debates.
Right.
They're talking of these platforms dealing with real practical stuff, like how teaching is done, setting standards for universities, even career advice for students.
Exactly. It's all about creating spaces for academics to share what works best, develop common standards, and actually have a voice in where higher education is going. It's interesting, actually. They point out that Australia used to have these kinds of platforms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that lots of other countries still do.
Huh. So it's not like some brand new radical idea.
No more like going back to a system that worked before,
Right.
but updating it for today's challenges. And what I find really convincing is their argument that this wouldn't just help academics.
Yeah, they said it would benefit everyone.
Exactly. They think it would make universities more stable, more sustainable, and it would help align academic values with the need to make money, you know?
So we'd have this system where academics actually have a say in how universities are run,
Right.
and where the focus isn't always on the bottom line.
Exactly. It's about ensuring teaching and research are the top priorities.
Which brings us back to their point about short-term thinking.
Yeah. They're pretty harsh in their criticism of this constant focus on immediate problems. They say it's actually making things worse.
Yeah, they compare it to constantly putting out fires.
Mm.
You're so busy dealing with the latest crisis that you never have time to step back and think about the future.
Right. Imagine a university president who's obsessed with enrollment numbers or the latest negative news story. Are they really thinking about the long term when it comes to research or what courses to offer?
Probably not. It's like they're always in emergency mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the authors link this short-term thinking directly to that decline in public trust we talked about.
Yeah, if universities seem unstable or like they're changing their priorities all the time.
Right. It makes it hard for people to trust them.
And they go even further. They say that this reactive approach is actually bad for universities financially.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, they argue that by always chasing these quick wins, universities are neglecting the investments that will pay off in the long run.
Okay.
For example, instead of building strong relationships with local communities
Right.
or investing in research that could have real benefits down the line, they're more focused on attracting international students
Yeah.
and getting quick research grants.
So it becomes a self-defeating cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Focusing on short-term gains leads to instability,
Yeah.
which makes it even harder to think about the long term.
So how do they propose breaking out of this cycle? It seems pretty deeply ingrained at this point.
Their solution goes back to that idea of academic leadership. They argue that academics naturally think long-term.
It's true. They're used to working on projects that take years, sometimes decades, to come to fruition.
Exactly. They're not driven by quarterly profits or what's trending in the media. They're looking at the big picture, asking the fundamental questions.
Right. And pursuing knowledge for its own sake.
And they're not afraid to challenge the way things are.
Exactly. They're willing to push the boundaries of what's possible. It's that kind of thinking that higher education needs more of.
For sure. But how would this shift to academic leadership actually work in practice? What would it look like day to day?
Well, the authors don't give us a step-by-step plan. But they do offer some clues. They talk about academics setting standards for their own profession, guiding curriculum development, and having a real say in how research funding is allocated.
So instead of administrators making all the decisions from the top down,
Yeah.
you'd have academics shaping things from the ground up.
Exactly. And this ties in nicely with their critique of the administrative class that we discussed earlier.
Right.
It's not about getting rid of administrators.
Right.
It's about recognizing that their expertise is in management and finance, not necessarily in the finer points of teaching and research.
It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Administrators should be supporting academics, not dictating their work.
Exactly. It's a
But
partnership, not a power struggle. And I think that's a really important takeaway for anyone involved in higher education, students, faculty, administrators. We need to find ways to work together, to leverage each other's strengths, and to make sure that the core mission of the university is always front and center in our decision making.
absolutely. Okay, so we've explored this idea of academic re-leadership, and it seems like it could be a way to address some of the big challenges facing Australian higher education. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more point that the authors raise, this idea of globalized higher education.
Yeah, they argue that in a world where universities are increasingly competing globally, it's more important than ever for Australian institutions to hold on to their unique identity and focus on their core mission.
They seem concerned that this global competition is pushing universities to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach,
Right.
where everyone's chasing the same rankings, offering the same programs, and essentially becoming interchangeable.
Exactly. And they believe that this kind of homogenization is actually a threat to the quality and diversity of higher education. It's like losing the unique flavors of different cultures and intellectual traditions.
So how does their call for academic leadership fit into this global context?
They believe that by giving academics more power to shape their institutions, Australian universities can carve out a special place for themselves in the global higher education landscape.
So instead of just copying what other universities are doing,
Right.
they can focus on developing their own strengths, building on their unique research capabilities, and offering programs that reflect the needs and interests of their communities.
It's about being a leader, not a follower. It's about showcasing the best of what Australian higher education has to offer to the world.
I really like that idea. It's not about retreating from the global stage. It's about engaging with it on your own terms.
Yeah.
It's about being confident in your own values and priorities.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful message for any university in any country that's trying to navigate this complex global higher education landscape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this discussion about academic leadership and its potential to address some of the big challenges facing Australian higher education. But it's important to remember that this is just one perspective, one possible path forward. Are there other viewpoints on these issues?
Yeah, good point.
Are there critics of this call for academic re-leadership? And what are some potential downsides or challenges that we need to be aware of? We'll explore those questions and more in Part 3. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about this opinion piece that argues for a pretty big shift in Australian higher education, putting academics back in control of their core business, as they put it. But like with any big change, there are going to be different opinions and potential roadblocks.
Oh, for sure. And it's important to recognize that not everyone is on board with this whole academic re-leadership thing. Some people might say that administrators are actually better equipped to handle the complicated financial side of things and all the operational challenges that universities face, in today's world.
That's a good point. Running a university these days is huge. It's like managing a small city with all the employees and budgets and rules and regulations. Could academics really handle all of that on top of teaching and research?
It's a valid question, and I think it highlights one of the big challenges of this whole idea, finding the right balance between academic expertise and administrative expertise.
Right. It's not about academics suddenly taking over every single aspect of running the university.
Exactly. It's more about making sure that their voices are heard, and that their priorities are reflected in how decisions are made.
So it's more of a partnership.
Exactly. Academics and administrators working together, each bringing their own skills and perspectives to the table.
But even if you could find that perfect balance, there are still practical questions. The authors talk about these national platforms for academics to set standards and guide policy. But how would that actually work? Who would pay for these platforms? And how would you make sure that they represent the interests of all academics?
Those are all important questions, and I think it's really crucial to have open and honest conversations about the potential costs, the logistics, and even the possibility of unintended consequences. Some people might worry that these platforms could become too bureaucratic, or that they could be dominated by certain disciplines or interest groups.
Right. Like any big organization, there's always a risk of things getting bogged down in bureaucracy.
Exactly.
Or being taken over by a small but vocal group. And we also have to think about the impact on individual academics.
Yeah.
If they're taking on more responsibility for things like setting standards and shaping policy, that could add to their workload, which is already pretty heavy.
That's true. It highlights the need to provide support and resources for academics who are taking on these leadership roles. You can't just give them more work without giving them the time, the funding, and the infrastructure they need to do it.
Right. It's not just about giving academics more power. It's about giving them the tools they need to use that power effectively.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where they feel valued and supported, and where they feel like they can make a real difference.
And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, creating a higher education system that actually fulfills its purpose,
Yeah.
advancing knowledge,
Yeah.
fostering critical thinking, and preparing students for the future.
It's a good reminder that the future of higher education isn't something that should be determined by market forces or by administrators. It's something that we all have a stake in, and something that we all have a responsibility to shape. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's think about the big picture. What does it really mean to retake control of higher education?
I think it means remembering that universities aren't just businesses. They're institutions with a long history and a responsibility to serve the public good. It means recognizing the expertise of academics and giving them the power to lead the way. It means thinking about the long term, investing in research that might not have immediate results, but could really change the world. And it means creating a culture of critical thinking, where students are encouraged to question things, to challenge authority, and to think for themselves.
It's about creating a higher education system that truly lives up to its name, a system that's driven by a passion for knowledge, a commitment to excellence, and a belief in the power of education to change lives and create a better future.
That's a great way to put it. And that's it for our deep dive into Australian higher education. We hope this conversation has given you some new ideas, challenged some of your assumptions, and maybe even inspired you to get involved in shaping the future of this really important sector. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.